Good morning, everyone. My name is E.J. Kimball. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for a Secure Free Society. Welcome to our event today, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the horrific terrorist attack on the Amia Jewish Cultural Center in Buenos Aires, carried out by Hezbollah in Iran. The importance of this anniversary and the implications of the continuing threat posed by the Iranian regime and its proxy Hezbollah to the Jewish community in Argentina and the entire region is why we are here today. All of our speakers have worked towards achieving justice for the victims of the attack and against those responsible for carrying it out. Last Thursday in Buenos Aires, Argentina commemorated the Amia anniversary, and the government of Argentina announced its designation of Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Hezbollah was the terrorist group responsible for the most American deaths before 9/11 and is responsible for carrying out the largest terrorist attack in the history of Argentina and all of Latin America. Now, for some, this designation of Hezbollah is long overdue, but most do not realize the significance of Argentina's action. This is the first designation of Hezbollah in Latin America as a terrorist organization. We at SFS are thankful for the role that we have been able to play in helping to raise awareness and coordinate with various interested parties on the need to designate Hezbollah in Argentina and throughout Latin America. Our event today is entitled Improving Regional Counterterrorism Cooperation in the Wake of a Tragedy. 2 years ago, we at SFS organized a high-level event here on Capitol Hill on the 23rd anniversary of the Amia bombing, focused on the need to strengthen anti-terrorism legal frameworks in Latin America. We had prosecutors and judges from Brazil, Peru, Chile, and elsewhere to discuss this issue in great detail, and that event helped get us here today. We have an impressive lineup of speakers who will unpack the recent actions by the United States and Argentine governments and how to continue advancing efforts to secure Latin America, the Jewish community, and the United States from the threat posed by Iran and Hezbollah. Now, the Trump administration has spent a lot of time and resources engaging Latin America to address the threat from terrorist organizations at a more robust level than previous administrations have. The Treasury and Justice Departments have taken the lead with aggressive action against Hezbollah. On Friday last week, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announced the designation of Salman Rauf Salman, a senior member of Hezbollah's external security organization, responsible for coordinating the attack on the Amia and additional terrorist operations in the Western Hemisphere. In January of 2018, then Attorney General Sessions announced the creation of the Hezbollah Financing and Narco-Terrorism Team to investigate individuals and networks supporting Hezbollah. In October of last year, then Attorney General Sessions named Hezbollah one of the 5 priority organizations for the Transnational Organized Crime Task Force. And on May 17th this year, a jury returned a guilty verdict against Ali Karani for carrying out covert terrorist activities in the United States on behalf of Hezbollah. He'll be sentenced in September. We at SFS are now in the process of helping to create a new counterterrorism and counter-transnational organized crime task force in Congress to work with our allies in Latin America on a bilateral and multilateral level, with special attention to Hezbollah's illicit activities in the region. In fact, last August, I was able to travel to Argentina with Joseph Humeyer, the executive director of SFS, to engage in discussions with senior officials within the Argentine Congress to begin this process. Now, the work that we've been doing at SFS has expanded in both our breadth and effectiveness. Our new international fellow from Brazil, Leonardo Coutinho, published a best-selling book with evidence of Iran and Hezbollah's ties to Venezuela, Bolivia, and other anti-American and anti-Israel nation states. Now, before I turn the podium over to my colleague, let me just highlight a few additional things that SFS has done under the leadership of Joseph. Now, Joseph is considered to be the top subject matter expert on Iran and Hezbollah's influence in Latin America within parts of the counterterrorism, defense, and intel community in the U.S. And in fact, Joseph created a conceptual model on Iran's modus operandi in Latin America that is now referred to as the Heumeier model within the intel community. Joseph has provided more than a half dozen testimonies before Congress, including the Committees on Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, and Homeland Security, raising awareness as to Iran's and Hezbollah's malign influence in the region and the legal vacuum in Latin America on anti-terrorism. He's taken dozens of trips to the region, particularly to Argentina, to work with policymakers and to raise awareness of Iran and Hezbollah's presence, and has worked with counterterrorism officials on advancing various Hezbollah cases, including the Amia case, Alberto Nisman's murder, and the illegal MOU between the previous Kirchner government of Argentina and Iran. In 2016, he published the groundbreaking report, After Nisman, which we have copies outside, on how Iran and Hezbollah benefited from the murder of Amia prosecutor Alberto Nisman, which was based on an analysis of over 40,000 wiretaps made public from Nisman's last investigation in 2015 on Christina Kirchner's backdoor deals with Iran that led to the MOU. This report and its contents have been submitted to Argentine authorities as evidence in various ongoing legal cases. Please join me in welcoming SFS Executive Director Joseph Heumeier.
Well, first and foremost, good morning. It's truly an honor to be with everybody here today, such a distinguished audience for an important day. Actually, the important day was last week, but we're going to acknowledge it. We're going to be here in memory of it today. I know Washington isn't the nicest place to be on late July, hot and humid, but everybody made it, and I think that's important. As EJ mentioned, my name is Joseph Heumeier. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Secure Free Society. We are a relatively new, next-generation national security think tank. We focus on what the Defense Department calls trans-regional threat networks, meaning networks that exist far abroad, as far as Asia, Middle East, Africa, but what permeates into our neighborhood, which is the Western Hemisphere. We take our findings in our research and we present it before policymakers all throughout the Americas, as far south as Argentina, in Colombia, and obviously here in the United States as well. I was in Buenos Aires very recently. I was in Buenos Aires last week, and it was probably one of the most impactful moments of my life to be on Pasteur Street, which is the street where the AMIA headquarters is located, on July 18th in 2019. And just seeing, for those that weren't there, there's a few of us, I think, that are in the audience that were there, but for those that weren't there, just to see the amount of people that came to commemorate this probably one of Argentina's worst days, to see the emotion out of many of the people that were in the audience and just in the crowd, and more importantly, to see the emotion of the people that were talking, representatives from the AMIA, the mother and the daughter of the late prosecutor Alberto Nisman. It was impossible not to feel how important this was. This really was the September 11th for Argentina, and I truly understood that better than ever when I was there last week. And I think that's more than, obviously more than the speakers, the impressive lineup of speakers and all of us, more than all that, I think what brings us here today, especially our impressive representation from the Diplomatic Corps, is the significance of what is the AMIA attack, which when I was there in Buenos Aires last week, when I was there on Pasteur Street, it kind of entered my mind that this really is more than an attack on Argentina. This was an attack on the entire Western Hemisphere. Before the AMIA attack, no one believed Hezbollah operated outside of their near abroad in Lebanon or northern part of Israel. Actually, I remember many counterterrorism analysts said that that's impossible. Hezbollah has no targets on the other side of the world. There is no logic to those attacks. But as we found out through the investigations, through the prosecution, well, not the prosecution, through the investigation and the prosecutors of the Ami attack, that's not the case. Hezbollah is very much entrenched back in the 80s, in the 90s, in Latin America, and to this day, that has not gone away. It's only grown significantly more. In many ways, what happened in the 80s and 90s in Argentina is connected to 9/11. The networks that operate in our side of the world, in our hemisphere, whether they're networks that engage fundamentally in terrorism or nowadays engage more in transnational organized crime, has become a convergence of just illicit actors that are moving south, north, east, west. And as these networks manifested and grew in size, in power, and capacity, it woke up the United States on that morning at 8:46 a.m. when we, here in Washington and New York, understood the significance of Islamic terrorism front and center. But as I mentioned, I don't believe it's the tragedy that brings us together. It's really the perseverance, the courage of those that continue to seek truth, that continue to seek justice, and to always remember the victims of these tragic terror attacks. So when I stood there in Buenos Aires on Pasteur Street, I thought essentially of all of you. I thought of everybody that I've met in the last decade or so, in all this time that I've been researching and looking into these issues, that in one way or another has helped get us to a point that in Latin America we're starting to have a serious conversation about Hezbollah and Iran. Matter of fact, everybody that's going to speak before us today, a very impressive lineup of speakers, I'm going to speak about the agenda in a second, in one way or another has worked on this issue, some with SFS, other with other groups and other think tanks, and has helped establish a conscious and an awareness of what happened in 1994 and what's taken from 1994 to 2019 to be able to get to today, where we actually have a major action on Hezbollah on behalf of the Argentine government. I'd like to publicly acknowledge President Macri, his entire national security team, and particularly the Ministry of Security, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and also their Congress, for their leadership on this. One of the arguments I would hear a lot of times when I was in other countries in Latin America, and the number one argument that you would hear was, this is not our threat. You know, this Hezbollah, Iran, even Al-Qaeda, Daesh, these are threats for other countries. They may come here, they may launder money, they may pass through, but they're not targeting us. Well, the Argentines knew that wasn't the case. But what they would do is they would constantly say, you know, we would rather be a hub than a target. And they would point to Argentina. They say, listen, if Argentina doesn't even acknowledge this, and they were bombed, then what's to say that any other country, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, needs to acknowledge that Hezbollah is a threat? And frankly, they were right. In Argentina, for a long time, they just didn't want to talk about this for various reasons, you know, political reasons, specific technical reasons. But that changed under the leadership of President Mauricio Macri. And from day one, actually, there was conversations about doing this, and it just needed the right people in the right place to understand how to do this. And we have some of those people with us here today. Congressman Luis Petri, who was instrumental in making this happen, led the path forward along with all the other ministers, the Minister Patricia Bullrich from the Ministry of Security, the President of the Financial Intelligence Unit, Mariano Federici, individuals that knew that if we just study this the right way and we find the right path, what was once considered politically impossible in Latin America will become politically inevitable. And I believe that to be the case in every country in Latin America, which is why I'm honored really to have such an impressive and distinguished audience representation from the diplomatic corps of 15 embassies are with us today, including Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Poland, Hungary, the Netherlands, Montenegro, Namibia, Afghanistan, and of course, I'd like to especially acknowledge Ambassador Fernando Oriz de Roa, who, if he's not here, the ambassador is with us today. Thank you, Ambassador, for gracing us with your presence today. I know this is a very important event and a very busy schedule for yourself as well. It's truly an honor to have all of you here, this wide range of international recognition on this important anniversary. So you'll hear from me later. I'll be on one of the panels. But what I would like to do now is just talk a little bit about the format of the event as we wait for Senator Cruz to come and join us. So this is a packed event. I've been accused of being too much what for the when, in the sense that we have 3 hours, right? So we have going to be here in this room for 3 hours. I don't know if any of you have seen an Avengers movie, but essentially it's going to be somewhat like that in the sense that we're not going to take breaks because we want to give panelists ample time to give their message. If you need to take a break, if you need to get up, get a glass of water, a cup of coffee, everything's in the back. Bathrooms are on the right and left. I think the women's bathroom is on the right if you get out the exit, and then the men's bathroom on the left. So feel free to obviously you're all grown adults, feel free to take a break when you need it. However, we're going to push through this agenda pretty aggressively. We're going to start with 3 speakers, very distinguished individuals that have a lot to share on this particular topic. Senator Cruz will be our first speaker. He needs no introduction. My colleague EJ will introduce him in a second once he arrives. But he is going to give his remarks from the congressional side, from the Senate side, on what this means, not just the AMIA, but also efforts against Hezbollah and Iran and their networks in Latin America. Then we're honored to be joined by a good friend and an important gentleman in all the efforts that have been bridging Latin America with Israel and the United States, Malcolm Hoenlein, who is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organization, who actually flew in from New York to join us today. So I'm very, very honored that he's been able to be with us. He has a very busy schedule, but Malcolm and I have been talking about these threats both on his radio program on the John Batchelor Show every Thursday evening, but also just in private for many, many years. Then we will have Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice, Mr. John Cronin, who John has been, a lot of us talk about this problem, right? We get involved, we're think tanks, right? We sit around, we discuss and we dialogue, but John's a prosecutor, so Don does more than talking. He finds these individuals, he prosecutes them, he convicts them. EJ mentioned the Karani case that was an ongoing case of a Hezbollah ESO, Unit 910 operative that was actually in New York. He wasn't very far away, that was arrested and detained, charged, and as of, I believe, April of this past year, convicted on terrorism charges. There are other individuals like him and part of the same network, and John's going to talk to us about the Department of Justice's effort in this initiative, in this effort. And then we're going to switch to panels. The first panel is going to be colleagues of mine that we've worked very closely together. Ilan Berman, who I see in the back, who me and Ilan took early trips to Latin America going back to 2012, where he can vouch for some of the reactions from some of my friends in Latin America about talking about Hezbollah and Iran and potential designations back in that day from the American Foreign Policy Council. Selena Rey Aluyo, who was just with I was just with her, actually, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, who works at the Perry Center in National Defense University, and who has a long history, going back to right after September 11th, about the tri-border area and the efforts that we were looking at combating the illicit finance of terror networks. And I was with Selena last week in Buenos Aires, and I remember we commented that, if it's kind of a shocking moment for me to think that we got to a point where we have a designation of Hezbollah in Latin America, it would be twice as shocking for Selena, who's been working on it for twice as long as I have. And we'll be moderated by my good friend Leah Soibel, who's doing great work through her organization Fuente Latina to take the message of the threat of international terrorism and Islamist terrorism to Latin America in Spanish and Portuguese, to be able to make sure that the public understands and has conscience of these threats. So that'll be a first panel. It'll be a discussion. It'll be about regional cooperation, the way forward, what can we do to strengthen both our technical abilities, but also make sure the public understands that this is a problem, not just in the United States here, but also in Latin America, where sometimes these things seem very foreign. Then we finally, and I do very much encourage you to stay for the entire program, because the last panel really, to to me is the most important panel in some ways, because first and foremost, because we will have Congressman Luis Petri. So as far as all of us have come today to be with us this morning, nobody's come further than Congressman Petri, who took a flight from Argentina to be able to be with us. As I mentioned before, he'll get a more lengthy introduction as we approach the event, as this panel. However, he is the single most important political actor in Argentina that made sure that the process for this designation of Hezbollah took place. He had the full, complete trust of President Macri. He worked hand in glove with the ministers that were involved, from the Foreign Ministry to the Security Ministry to the Justice Ministry and others. And he is also a leading figure in the Argentine National Congress. So he is going to speak firsthand about how this happened, which in the United States, in Washington, this has not been told yet. We have not explained how this has taken place, which is probably about, it's been going on for years, but probably about the last 6-7 months is really where things started begun to heat up. And we have two important individuals from here in the U.S. Congress that have been involved in this for many years. First is Congressman Robert Pittenger, who started something called the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum, which he's now the chairman of this. They moved it, it's become its own nonprofit organization. But the Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum is essentially a network. The first time Robert invited me to one of these forums in 2017, I believe, was actually in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And not coincidentally, Congressman Pittenger, myself, Congressman Petri, Congressman Eduardo Amadeo, another important congressman from Argentina, sat on a panel together and talked specifically about this moment, about the day that we can come, that we can actually have the legal mechanisms to combat terrorism. And so Congressman Pittenger has been gracious to join us today. I know he's a friend of many in the audience, a friend of many in the diplomatic corps, and is continuing to do these forums worldwide. I think the most recent one was in France in June, a month or so ago, and is continuing to do others both in Europe and the Middle East and hopefully in Latin America as well. And then last but certainly not least is Congressman Jeff Duncan. My first testimony, congressional testimony ever, was in 2013. And in fact, I was supposed to be an alternate to the hearing because the primary witness was Alberto Nisman. If you remember, Alberto Nisman was invited by Congressman Jeff Duncan to testify before the House Homeland Security Committee and was asked to give his findings in a recently released report, which was another report from Nisman in 2013, where he talked about the network. He talked about the same network that attacked Hezbollah has only grown and was, according to his report, active in 8 countries in South America and the Caribbean. So Nisman was invited by the Congressman Jeff Duncan in the Congress of the United States. Unfortunately, the president at the time of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, blocked him from coming, made sure that he was not allowed to come. So I was, as they call in baseball, I was the pinch hitter. I came in to testify in the place of Alberto Nisman, but it was before Congressman Duncan in his hearing, and he actually achieved, I think, I might be wrong about this, but I think it's the only piece of legislation to this date in the Congress that actually specifically addresses the threat of Iran and Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. It actually mandated the State Department to write a report about the activities and presence of Iran and Hezbollah. I don't believe it's an annual report. I think it was a one-time report, which they eventually published in, I believe, 2015. Nevertheless, Congressman Duncan will be here. I'm very join us later. Very gracious with his presence, and then our senior fellow Hugo Cha from SFS, who's an expert on transnational organized crime, will be with us to moderate that panel. So as you can tell, it's a lot of what for the when. But I very much encourage everybody to stay to the end because I think that's going to be where we're going to learn a lot more about the specific nature of the congressional legislative actions that took place. Now, as we wait for Senator Cruz, let me talk a little bit about some things in the center and kind of in a shameless self-promotion. As EJ mentioned, we have a report outside for those that want to take it. It's called After Nisman. I highly encourage you to take the report. It's also online on our website, securefreesociety.org, both available in English and in Spanish. The English and Spanish version do differ a little bit. The Spanish version was written specifically for the government of Argentina to be able to be presented to some of the prosecutors in several legal cases that are manifesting themselves related to the AMIA, related to the MOU, related to Nisman's death. So we have copies of that outside. There's another product I'd like to plug, which is a new product for SFS. It's actually a term that we're coining at the center. It's called the VRIC monitor, VRIC monitor. And what the VRIC stands for, it's not what you think. It's not the BRIC, which is the Goldman Sachs term for emerging markets of Brazil, Russia, India, China. We played off that term and we created something called the VRIC, because I believe that's the real alliance, more on intelligence and security of Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and China. And so what the VRIC monitor does is it compiles open source reporting month to month on the presence of these external and extra-regional actors in Latin America and reports it out every month. So you can subscribe to that on our website. It's a digital product that'll be emailed to your inbox every month. And I think it's another way to kind of further inform folks as to some of these trans-regional threat networks. We are also going to be publishing this year a lengthy report, monograph, on Hezbollah's crime terror network in Latin America. It's an investigation we've been engaged in, well, really forever, but really the last year and a half, where we've gotten very specific information, which includes Hezbollah's presence in Venezuela, it includes Hezbollah's presence in Bolivia, and it'll include, obviously, the most historic part of Hezbollah's network in the tri-border area. My colleague Leonardo Coutinho, who's our international fellow from Brazil, will join me in authoring that report. And then lastly, I believe the senator is here. Lastly, I invite everybody to follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter. You have the Instagram. You have all the website URLs, hashtags, domains up on this banner. We constantly are coming up with new products and new materials, so we're very much looking forward to stay engaged. This is not the end of this conversation on Iran, Hezbollah in the Western Hemisphere. This is very much the beginning of a serious conversation that's taking place in Latin America and that will also take place here in Washington, D.C. And with that, the senator's here, so I will turn it over to E.J. Kimball, who will introduce Senator Cruz.
We are honored to be joined today by Senator Ted Cruz and look forward to his keynote remarks. We at SFS have worked closely with Senator Cruz and his staff, briefing them regularly on developments in Latin America. Senator Cruz has been a leader in combating the malign role of extra-regional actors in our hemisphere, specifically dealing with Iran and its proxy Hezbollah. Senator Ted Cruz represents 28 million Texans in the U.S. Senate as a passionate fighter for limited government and economic growth. He has authored 39 legislative measures signed into law. Recent victories include leading the effort to repeal Obamacare's individual mandate, imposing sanctions on terrorists who use civilians as human shields, designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism, and leading the fight to confirm principled constitutionalists to our courts. Senator Cruz is a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, a former law clerk to Chief Justice William Rehnquist, and former Solicitor General of Texas. He has argued 9 cases before the Supreme Court, and in November of 2018, he was reelected to the Senate by the people of Texas. Senator Cruz currently sits on the Senate Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees. Along with Senator Marsha Blackburn, Senator Cruz sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo to urge Paraguay and Brazil to follow Argentina's lead and designate Hezbollah. Senator Cruz has made amendments to the NDAA year after year to have DOD focus on the trans-regional threats from hostile regimes abroad in Argentina, Venezuela, and elsewhere in Latin America. And finally, in commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the bombing of the AMIA, Senator Cruz joined with Senator Menendez and his colleagues in a bipartisan resolution remembering the attack and to recommit efforts to uphold justice for the victims. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ted Cruz.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Thank you to everyone here at SFS for standing up for security and standing up for freedom. These are fights, the stakes of which are enormous, and they are battles that make an enormous difference, not just in the United States, but across the globe. Thank you for having me here to discuss this very important topic. The Amia bombing and where we are dealing with Hezbollah 25 years after that horrific attack. On July 18th, 1994, at 9:53 in the morning, a Hezbollah suicide bomber drove a bomb into the Jewish Community Center in downtown Buenos Aires. The blast murdered 85 innocent people and injured 300. It is to this day the deadliest terror attack that Argentina has ever seen. This was not the first time that Hezbollah had targeted and killed Jews in Argentina. 2 years before the Amia attack, on March 17, 1992, Hezbollah bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, murdering 29 people and injuring 242. To this day, the terrorists who committed these atrocious acts have never faced justice. Last week, along with my Senate colleagues, I introduced a resolution remembering the 25th anniversary of the Amia bombing. The resolution also urges President Trump to monitor Iran's activities in the Western Hemisphere and to assist the government of Argentina in supporting its ongoing investigation into the death of Argentine prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who investigated the attack and who was murdered in 2015, a matter of hours before he was going to publicly report his findings. The Amia bombing was not the first or the last terror attack carried out by Hezbollah in Latin America or around the world. And yet, over 2 decades after the bombing, Hezbollah is still very much alive and active in the tri-border area that encompasses the borders of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. The growth of Hezbollah in Latin America remains unchecked. I commend Argentina for blacklisting Hezbollah, the first Latin American country to do so. President Macri has said this month that Argentina will be moving forward in declaring Hezbollah a terrorist organization. I sincerely hope that happens, and happens soon. And I hope that other Latin American countries, particularly Paraguay and Brazil, will soon follow in identifying Hezbollah for what it is, a profoundly dangerous terrorist organization. Last week, I sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo encouraging him to urge his Brazilian and Paraguayan counterparts to acknowledge Hezbollah's significance in their home countries and the terror that Hezbollah perpetuates within their borders. 25 years after the Amia bombing, Hezbollah continues to radicalize people in Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil through mosques and schools that preach the group's extremist agenda. It's time for Latin America to reckon with the significant and the dangerous presence of Hezbollah in the region. And it's also time for the larger international community to combat Iran's proxies wherever we find them, in Latin America and in the Middle East. There has been some progress. President Trump rightly pulled out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal, which was a devil's bargain and foolhardy from its inception. The Obama administration had greased the nuclear deal with bribes and secret agreements, including a side deal to allow Iran to inspect itself. There was a ransom deal that gave Iran $1.7 billion in cash in unmarked bills flown in pallets in the dead of night. And there were several wire transfers from America to Iran ranging from $1 to $10 million. The Obama administration subordinated the American financial system and American law to the deal. And they were willing to put the U.S. dollar and U.S. banks to work moving money for the Iranians. Luckily, those actions have come to light. And through President Trump's leadership, we have pulled out of this disastrous deal. But there is much more work to do. In order to keep Iran in check, we need to support our allies, especially Israel, and combat Iran's proxies in Lebanon, Latin America, and around the world. When the Ayatollah says, "Death to America and death to Israel," I believe him. Just 8 months ago, in December of 2018, Israel uncovered 6 sophisticated cross-border tunnels built by Hezbollah in South Lebanon, which included stairs, a rail system, and wide passageways allowing for the movement of equipment and forces intended to cause substantial harm to Israeli civilians by enabling terrorists to sneak across the border and carry out murderous attacks. Last month, I introduced the Countering Hezbollah in Lebanon's Military Act of 2019, which would withhold 20% of the U.S. military assistance to the Lebanese Armed Forces, the LAF, unless the president can certify that they're taking necessary steps to end Hezbollah's and Iran's influence over the LAF. United States Security Council Resolution 1701 required the Lebanese armed forces to disarm Hezbollah, and the United States gives military assistance to Lebanon to enforce that resolution. Last year, I secured language requiring an evaluation of whether the resolution was being implemented. And now it's time to take the next step and to reassess the assistance that we provide if Iran continues to exert direct influence on the LAF, either directly or through Hezbollah. The international community has failed to hold Hezbollah accountable. But the United States needs to send a message that we will not turn a blind eye to terrorists or their war crimes. Argentina should fight for justice for the victims of Hezbollah's horrific terror act 25 years ago. And the United States should assist them in doing so. And I will continue doing everything I can in the Senate to keep Iran in check, to ensure that maximum pressure means maximum pressure, and to ensure that under no circumstances ever does the Ayatollah Khamenei, with his theocratic, maniacal chant of death to America and death to Israel, that never will the Ayatollah acquire nuclear weapons. Thank you.